Gotta say, Death Battle's really been knocking out of the park with new franchises this season so far. I previously had praised Season 9 for having the most new franchises introduced to the series, and it seems like Season 10 is already on track to beating that if we keep up this momentum. Because we already have 5 new franchises introduced into Death Battle this season. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Killua vs Misaka was an episode that I was looking forward to. Not necessarily because of the matchup itself, but more so because I like Hunter x Hunter a lot, and I was glad that it was getting introduced, let alone with my favorite character from the show. It was also a battle themed around lightning powers, which is my favorite element in all of Elements, basically. So I was happy about that as well. But onto the actual episode. Was it good? Let's find out. The analyses were both honestly really solid. I don't know what happened between this season and the last, but the writing for the analysis segments for this season have honestly been really good. They're paced great, and the way they focus on story and sneak versus stuff and feats in feels natural and doesn't ruin the pacing. The writing for Wiz and Boomstick has also seen some significant improvements. They're giving Wiz more personality in terms of what stuff he gets excited about. The way he gushes over the tactical and complicated aspects of both series is enjoyable and kind of endearing. Editing is spot on as usual, and the comedy is also pretty solid, even though the Killua-ton thing got old after a while. Boomstick reacting to Nen like it's Dragon Ball Key like everything else is was also pretty funny. But I also liked even more how Wiz immediately hits him with the actually, and they go into a whole, or he goes into a whole spiel about why Nen's unique and cool, which all of the stuff he said I agreed with. Also, they somehow managed to sneak the bungee gum meme while not outright saying it. Absolute mad lads. Misaka's was also pretty interesting. I haven't seen a certain magical index, but I have a friend of mine who had seen it give me a quick synopsis before the episode came out, and hearing them talk about it, but in more detail, was pretty interesting. I don't really have much to say on it itself, besides the fact that I liked how it was paced, the comedic bits were good, hearing them talk about the strategy was cool, and I'm sorry, is that lab rats? Yes! Yes! Okay, besides that just, beautiful reference and comedic bit, the rundowns were good. Comedy was good, pacing was great. I was happy to have Hunter x Hunter and Killua get treated with respect more than anything, because you know what, his rundown was good, and hearing them talk about his story and Hunter x Hunter as a whole was really interesting and almost kind of surreal, because I really like that show. But yeah, rundowns were good. And now, moving on to the fight. And we're immediately greeted with probably the part of the episode that bugs me the most. There aren't that many other criticisms I have about the fight itself. There are a few pieces of criticism I have besides that though, like some of the weird looking angles with the sprites and, well, this is more of a nitpick, kind of feeling like Killua is mostly at a disadvantage throughout the fight. Maybe it's a slight bias because he lost overall, but for the most part it feels like he's on the defensive most of the time. With the exception of the very end where he gets the upper hand for like a couple seconds. Even during the one section of hand-to-hand, the one aspect of the animation that you'd expect Killua to have a significant advantage in, since they emphasized that that was his one big leg up in the conclusion. But during the only extended hand-to-hand sequence, they're more equal than anything. I know they said, well, Misaka didn't have the outright advantage in hand-to-hand, but she also had the capability of holding her own because Killua was too slow to close the gap in terms of speed between them. Which is fine, that makes sense, but in terms of the animation, it's just kind of annoying that they didn't really do a good job of showcasing the one aspect of the debate that Killua had a clear advantage in, and had it seem more equal than anything, especially since they did a really good job overall showing off Misaka's versatility and abilities, as well as her ranged attacks, as well as the strategy in both of their fighting styles. But that's just my opinion, maybe that's just me looking more into it. Might be more of a nitpick, but that was one of my takeaways from rewatching the episode. But probably my biggest complaint about the episode is the beginning, specifically the setup. So Killua finds a random coin laying on the ground, Misaka asks for it, and Killua decides to mess with her and taunt her with it, which is grounds for murder, I guess. I understand that for a lot of these episodes, you have to make exceptions in order to make the fight work and all, since in a lot of cases, most of the characters fighting each other wouldn't realistically fight at all, but I feel like you could have done a bit better job than this. If it wasn't a coin and maybe something a bit more valuable that both characters would have wanted to get their hands on, then I get it. But unless that coin was made of solid gold or Killua just really liked it, I don't really see a reason for Killua to taunt Misaka like that. It's basically the ultimate escalation of finders keepers, and then Misaka just decides, yeah, that's grounds for murder. Then again, Hank killed Adam because he didn't knock on his door before entering his office, so maybe I shouldn't be talking about the bad setups this season, even though Ant-Man vs. Adam's made more sense in my opinion. Okay, moving on from those flaws and a bit of a rant, I do like the episode overall. Starting off with the basic stuff, as typical with modern Death Battle, 3D backgrounds, visuals, and sound effects all look amazing. As well as the sprites, even though they look kind of weird at certain angles. I don't know, just something about those completely, like, sideways angles of the characters look kind of weird to me. But besides that, the sprite work and the visual and audio side of the episode is amazing as usual. Speaking of audio, the voice acting is also really solid. Fincy Kelly did a really good job as Misaka, and managed to pull off that subdued, more calculative tone that makes sense given the way her character was described. I've never seen a certain magical index like I said before, so I don't know if that voice portrayal was accurate, but given how they talked about her and the way that she's a tsundere and she's more subdued and just all that personality stuff just led to that voice for the character made sense. And she does a really good job, like leading up to the end with her final line. I thought that was really good. But the bigger surprise for me was Gisele, I don't know how you're supposed to know, or I'm just going to go with Gisele Fernandez as Killua. I legit thought that they got the original voice actors for Killua to play him in this episode, because she did a really good job. She has that laid-back, confident attitude that Killua was known for, and she gets it so perfectly. And it's a really spot-on impression of Cristina Valenzuela's interpretation. It's a last name and a half. I'm sorry if I butchered that. Now onto the fight itself, because there is a lot to enjoy. The highlight for me personally was how much the fight focuses on the more tactical aspects of both series. They highlight in both analyses that both shows have a heavy emphasis on strategy over brute strength, which is what makes them so much more different than other popular anime out there like, say, Dragon Ball or Naruto. There's a lot of moments where the two of them use strategy to try and get the other hand. Misaka using oil, I guess, to disrupt the rhythm echo, and both of them realizing pretty quickly into the fight what their advantages and disadvantages are and try to compensate, with Misaka realizing that she needs to keep her distance and Killua deciding he needs to get in close. It sets up an interesting dynamic for the rest of the fight, with Killua making efforts to try and get in close, even though it doesn't matter when he does get in close, and Misaka trying to prevent it. There's a lot of interesting exchanges between both of their powers, and they get to use basically everything in their entire arsenal, which isn't that hard because it's not like these guys are like Mega Man or whatever, right? Misaka gets to use her coins, lift some objects, summon down storms, use her sword, stick to walls, well, both of them can stick to walls, and also summon her giant lightning avatar kaiju thingy, which was made thanks to some phenomenally hand-drawn animation. Killua gets some stuff too, thankfully, even though he doesn't have as many abilities as Misaka. He gets to use his rhythm echo, his claws, his lightning, his yo-yos, godspeed, stick to walls, and even his skateboard, which was cool to see implemented somehow. I wasn't expecting them to try and find a way to implement his skateboard, but you know what, they managed to make it work. There's also some cool individual moments, like Misaka figuring out the rhythm echo, Killua using his yo-yos to try and get the jump on Misaka, only for her to turn them around on him. And while I like how Godspeed was used to give Killua an edge, even though it lasts for like several seconds, I kinda wish the transformation was more impactful than just him turning it on like a light switch. Not saying it had to be like Super Saiyan 4 Goku or Ego Death Tetsuo levels of impactful, but Killua's Godspeed transformation was pretty impactful in the anime, so I just kinda wish that they implemented more of that transformation than what they did in the animation. But regardless, I like how it looks, and I like how he jumps off the skateboard and grabs Misaka only to slam her into the side of the building, and the following line was also pretty good. Now, the following scene I've seen get compared to Miles vs. Static a bit, and yeah, I can see it. Electric teenagers fighting while standing on the side of a building using electromagnetism, and you could argue that there are some other comparisons between the two episodes you could make, but putting that aside, judging the episode on its own merit, this is probably the best stretch of fighting we get throughout the entire fight besides the upcoming death. There's some good hand-to-hand, which is followed by a clash that legitimately felt more impactful than the end of Deku vs. Asta, because unlike that fight, we actually get to see the impact of the clash, with Killua punching Misaka in the face and whatnot. And moving on to the death, and honestly, I love everything about this final stretch of the fight. Misaka summons a giant lightning avatar, which I must reiterate is beautifully hand animated and looks absolutely stunning. I also love the following shot of Killua realizing that the avatar can be disrupted, complemented by a really cool shot of him hovering over the city and the avatar, only for him to summon a massive bolt of lightning to basically smite it, disrupting the avatar and then moving in for the kill. Which honestly, considering how fitting it was for a Killua finishing move, I legitimately thought that Killua had won here. Then I saw that it was a clone and knew it came next. At first I was wondering when she had the time to set up the clone, but then I realized literally as I was writing this, that she probably did it after Killua punched her through the city after the building fight. And the actual finishing move, it's pretty freaking good. Wiz put it better, much better than I did, but again, it leads heavily into the tactical aspects of Magical Index and Hunter x Hunter, which I think is pretty cool. Also with how she's calculating to herself and how the music cuts out when she decides that now is the moment to fire, it's also really effective. The death itself is pretty good too, it's gory but not too gory, and Giselle delivers a good death scream. And Misaka got the coin that she was after in the beginning, so all is well. Overall, this episode is pretty solid. Going into this, I was mainly just excited because Hunter x Hunter was getting on Death Battle at all, and I'm glad it was something like this that debuted the franchise and not something like Deku vs. Sorry, I almost threw up in my mouth a bit. Regardless, this episode does have a few flaws that doesn't really keep it from being standout overall, but they are flaws that kind of sour the experience, if that makes sense. Like, they don't impact the overall episode and its quality, but it does kind of just sour the experience. Hopefully that makes sense. I still really like the episode, and it didn't disappoint me by any means, but I also wasn't expecting it to be really standout or spectacular, especially after the episode that came before it. Despite that, I'd probably give it a solid 7 or 8 out of 10. Better than Ant-Man vs. Adam in my opinion, but nowhere close to reaching Dark Souls vs. Skyrim. Unfortunately, I can see it becoming more and more obsolete as the season comes out, and I can see it becoming a pretty forgettable episode in the future. It's an episode that people will think back on and go, yeah, that episode was good, and then move along. To steal a phrase from Critical Drinker, it's basically a hamburger episode. It's an episode that's exactly what you were expecting start to finish, maybe a little bit better, and it ultimately leaves you satisfied by the end of it. Maybe my feelings toward this episode will change as it grows on me more, but as of right now, I consider it a solid episode and a really good introduction to the series for both franchises. Also, the track is good. It's fun, has a consistently good level of energy, and I like how the pace changes as the fight progresses. Not really much else to say about it, I just like it, it's good. And now on to the next time, in which, yeah, I'm excited. Probably the least excited I've been for an episode this season though, since, while I know a lot of people love this matchup, I'm not really one of those people. Not that the matchup is bad or anything, I'm just not personally invested in it, as all. I'm mainly just looking forward to them talking about all the different third-party material and supplementary stuff that Stitch has been in. I remember watching the cast episode for it when it came out and everyone being surprised about some of the stuff that Stitch has done. I don't remember all of it, and I don't really feel like going back through the episode to grab the highlights, but I still think this episode's going to be pretty fun regardless. I don't really care much for Rocket, but Stitch winning would be funny, so I'm gonna root for him. Anyways, that's all from me. Sorry that this review took longer than normal, I had some other projects that I was working on in the meantime. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I will always be terrible at writing outros.